The bathroom mirror at Angelo's Pizzeria reflected three jagged cracks that split Maya Santos's face into fractured pieces, like a shattered photograph trying to tell competing stories. Her 17-year-old hands gripped the chipped porcelain sink until her knuckles turned bone white, watching her lips move in a silent countdown that had nothing to do with panic. 3, 2, 1. The breathing technique her uncle Roberto had drilled into her during countless hours in their converted garage gym was automatic now, a survival mechanism disguised as meditation. The sound of metal scraping concrete filtered through the bathroom door, cutting through the usual dinner rush chaos like a blade through silk. Outside, Derek Hoffman crouched beside the corner booth, methodically sweeping a handheld metal detector under tables with the precision of someone conducting a search rather than cleaning up spilled quarters. His pale green eyes moved across the worn linoleum with predatory intensity, while the device's electronic whine created an unsettling harmony with the pizza oven's constant hum. Every customer in the restaurant shifted unconsciously in their seats, responding to tension they couldn't name, but definitely felt. The voice in Derek's earpiece was barely audible above the ambient noise. "Found anything yet?" His jaw tightened as he moved to the next table, still searching. She has to know something, she has to. 6 hours earlier, Lincoln High School had pulsed with typical Friday afternoon energy. Students slammed locker doors with the desperate enthusiasm of teenagers escaping toward weekend freedom, creating a metallic percussion that echoed off institutional beige walls. Maya navigated through the chaos with practiced invisibility, her oversized black hoodie serving as armor against unwanted attention from classmates who had already categorized her as scholarship kid, free lunch program, thrift store clothes. She almost made it to her locker without incident. Oops! Derek Hoffman's shoulder collided with hers, sending her backpack sliding across the polished floor. The impact carried deliberate force. Nothing accidental about the way his 6-foot frame towered over her as he made no move to help gather the scattered contents. Instead, he crouched down with false concern, his real intention becoming clear when his fingers deliberately lingered over a worn photograph that had tumbled from her history textbook. The image showed her Uncle Roberto in boxing gear, but what captured Derek's attention were the 3 men in expensive suits standing behind him, their faces partially obscured by shadows and what appeared to be intentional damage to the photograph's surface. "Interesting family photo," Derek said, his casual tone contradicted by the calculated gleam in his eyes. "Where did your uncle really work before he died?" The question struck Maya like ice water. She snatched the photograph back, but not before noticing how Derek studied every detail with the intensity of someone conducting an investigation rather than engaging in casual teenage cruelty. "He was a trainer," she replied, stuffing the photo deep into her backpack's interior pocket. "Everyone knows that." Derek straightened slowly, brushing non-existent dust from his Letterman jacket. The gesture seemed casual, but Maya caught the way his eyes never left her face, cataloging every micro-expression with uncomfortable precision. "Right, just a trainer." His smile held no warmth. "Funny how trainers on minimum wage manage to afford houses in Riverside Heights." The observation landed like a physical blow. Maya had wondered about that herself during sleepless nights since Roberto's death 8 months ago. The modest 2-story house where she lived with her aunt seemed beyond the reach of someone whose only documented income came from part-time sessions at Murphy's boxing gym. The afternoon shift at Angelo's Pizzeria usually provided Maya with something approaching peace. The repetitive rhythm of taking orders, wiping tables, and restocking supplies created a meditative quality that helped quiet the constant questions swirling through her mind about her uncle's mysterious past. Today felt different from the moment she tied her apron strings. Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez, The restaurant's owner stood behind the counter with her phone pressed against her ear, speaking in rapid Spanish. Even without fluent comprehension, Maya recognized the anxiety in Carmen's voice. The older woman's free hand twisted the silver cross pendant at her throat, a nervous habit that appeared whenever she felt threatened. "They're here again," Carmen whispered into the phone before ending the call abruptly. The bell above the entrance chimed, and Derek Hoffman stepped inside, followed by his constant companions Tyler Nash and Kevin Brooks. The trio moved with purpose that had nothing to do with hunger for pizza. Tyler carried a backpack that seemed unusually heavy, while Kevin positioned himself near the emergency exit with the casual stance of someone accustomed to blocking escape routes. Maya felt her chest tighten as recognition dawned. This wasn't coincidence. "Table for 3, Derek announced, though his gaze swept the restaurant's interior with methodical precision rather than searching for available seating. Carmen forced a smile that fooled no one. "Of course, right this way." She led them to the corner booth, the same area where Derek would later crouch with his metal detector. As they settled into the red vinyl seats, Tyler pulled out what appeared to be a smartphone and began filming, though his fingers moved across the screen with technical expertise that suggested more sophisticated recording capabilities. "I'll have a large pepperoni," Derek said when Maya approached with her order pad, "and make sure it's extra hot. I like things that burn." The words carried a double meaning that made her pen slip against the paper. She steadied her grip and continued writing, refusing to acknowledge the implied threat. Kevin ordered next, his massive frame dwarfing the booth seat. "Just a Coke. I'm not really here for the food." Tyler looked up from his device long enough to add, "Nothing for me. I'm already getting everything I need." As Maya walked away to place their order, she caught fragments of their conversation drifting across the restaurant. The words came in careful whispers, but the dining room's acoustics carried them just loudly enough for her to distinguish key phrases. Serial numbers, storage unit, weekly transfers. Her hands trembled as she pinned the order ticket to the kitchen window. Whatever game Derek and his friends were playing, it involved far more than teenage bullying. The pizza emerged from the oven 15 minutes later, cheese bubbling with volcanic heat, just as Derek had requested. Maya balanced the metal tray carefully as she approached their table, determined to complete this interaction without incident. She should have known better. As she leaned forward to place the pizza on the table, Derek's phone suddenly slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor beside the booth. Without thinking, Maya crouched to retrieve it. And that's when he struck. "Your uncle took something that doesn't belong to him," Derek whispered, his words intended for her ears alone. The phone felt surprisingly heavy in her palm, heavier than any normal smartphone should. When she tried to hand it back, his fingers closed over hers with grip strength that belonged to someone accustomed to physical confrontation. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed, though doubt crept into her voice like smoke under a door. "Sure you don't." Derek released her hand and accepted the phone. But his smile suggested the conversation was far from over. Roberto Santos, the neighborhood trainer who somehow managed to retire with enough money to buy property in the nicest part of town. Nothing suspicious about that. Maya straightened quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Around them, the restaurant continued its normal evening rhythm. But she felt isolated in a bubble of tension that threatened to suffocate her. As she moved between tables, refilling water glasses and clearing plates, she became aware of Tyler's camera following her movements. Not obviously. He maintained the pretense of casual filming, but every angle seemed calculated to capture her working routine, her interactions with customers, even the way she accessed the cash register. During a brief lull in service, she retreated toward the kitchen to collect fresh napkin dispensers. That's when she noticed Kevin had moved from the booth to a position near the front door, his bulk effectively blocking the main exit. Tyler had shifted to cover the rear exit that led through the kitchen area. They had her trapped. The realization sent adrenaline coursing through her system, but she forced herself to maintain normal movement patterns. Whatever they wanted, showing fear would only encourage them. Carmen emerged from the basement storage area carrying a case of soda, but her usual efficiency seemed strained. As she passed Maya near the drink station, she pressed a folded piece of paper into the younger woman's palm. "Don't trust anyone," Carmen whispered without moving her lips. "Meet me in basement after closing." Before Maya could respond, Tyler appeared at her shoulder with unsettling silence. "Everything okay over here?" His question sounded innocent enough, but his eyes fixed on Carmen with uncomfortable intensity. "Just restocking," Carmen replied, though her voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there moments before. Tyler smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. "Great. We're really enjoying our meal, especially the atmosphere." Gee. As the evening progressed, the tension in Angelo's Pizzeria grew thick enough to taste. Regular customers seemed to sense something wrong, finishing their meals quickly and leaving larger tips than usual, as if apologizing for abandoning ship before the storm hit. By 8:30, only 3 tables remained occupied. Derek and his companions showed no signs of leaving, despite having finished their food an hour earlier. They sat in their corner booth like predators waiting for the right moment to strike, occasionally murmuring to each other in voices too low for Maya to overhear. Carmen moved through her closing routine with visible nervousness, checking locks and counting the register with hands that shook slightly. Every few minutes, she glanced toward the basement door, as if calculating the distance she'd need to cover in case of emergency. Maya wiped down tables with mechanical precision, her mind racing. The kitchen's rear exit remained blocked by Kevin, while Tyler had positioned himself with a clear view of both the front door and the basement access. They had orchestrated this confrontation with military precision. That's when everything began to unravel. Derek stood slowly, his movements deliberate and threatening. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a manila envelope that looked official, the kind used by law enforcement agencies for evidence documentation. "Time to stop playing games, Maya." He opened the envelope and spread its contents across the nearest table like a dealer arranging cards. Photographs, documents, and what appeared to be surveillance printouts created a mosaic of evidence that made her uncle's life look like a criminal enterprise. The central image showed Roberto Santos standing outside a warehouse at night, a briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. Even in the grainy surveillance photo, his body language suggested someone conducting serious business rather than athletic training. "Your sweet uncle wasn't just a trainer," Derek continued, his voice gaining confidence as he watched her face pale. "He was a collector. Someone who made sure debts got paid, if you catch my meaning." Maya stared at the photographs, her mind struggling to reconcile these images with the gentleman who had taught her to tie her shoes and helped with homework every night. But fragments of memory began clicking into place, like puzzle pieces she had ignored for years. The late-night phone calls Roberto would take in the garage, speaking in voices too low for her to overhear. The way he always carried large amounts of cash, but never seemed to have a conventional job. The mysterious visitors who would arrive after her bedtime, their cars visible from her bedroom window but gone by morning. "People want their property back," Derek said, tapping the briefcase in the photograph. "And you're going to help us find it." Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "I don't know anything about any property." Wrong answer. Tyler looked up from his recording device with predatory satisfaction. "We have testimony from 3 witnesses who say Roberto bragged about his retirement fund hidden somewhere safe, somewhere his family could access if anything happened to him." The implication hit her like a physical blow. They weren't just accusing her uncle of criminal activity. They were suggesting he had stolen something valuable and left clues for her to find it. "That's impossible," she said, but doubt crept into her voice. "Just what?" Derek interrupted. "Just a trainer who managed to buy a house worth $300,000 on paper wages of $30,000 a year. Just a guy who happened to know half the city's most dangerous people by first name." Carmen stepped forward from behind the counter, her face ashen but determined. "That's enough. You boys need to leave. Now!" Kevin shifted position slightly, making it clear that Carmen's request carried no authority here. Tyler continued filming, his device now openly pointed at Maya as she struggled to process this devastating reinterpretation of her family history. Derek smiled with genuine pleasure at the chaos he had created. "One way or another, you'll tell us where he hid it. We can do this easy, or we can do it hard." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Maya felt the walls of Angelo's Pizzeria closing in around her, transforming the familiar space into a trap she couldn't escape. That's when she noticed something that changed everything. Tyler's recording device wasn't a smartphone at all. It was professional surveillance equipment, the kind used by law enforcement for gathering evidence in criminal investigations. The realization crashed over her like cold water. This wasn't random harassment by high school bullies. This was an official operation. "Who are you really?" she whispered, though part of her already knew the answer would destroy whatever remained of her normal life. Derek's smile widened as he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a leather wallet. The badge inside caught the overhead lights, reflecting gold letters that spelled out a truth more terrifying than any teenage threat. "Detective James Hoffman, Metro Police Department," Derek said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "My dad's been investigating your uncle's activities for 2 years. Roberto Santos wasn't just connected to dangerous people. He was their enforcer, and when he died, $500,000 in stolen money disappeared with him." The accusation hung in the air like poisonous gas. Maya felt her knees weaken as the familiar world of Angelo's Pizzeria transformed into something unrecognizable. Every assumption about her uncle, her family, her own identity crumbled like a house built on sand. But beneath the shock and confusion, something else began to stir. The same controlled fury that had carried her through boxing training sessions when other kids made jokes about her thrift store clothes and free lunch program eligibility. "You're lying," she said, though the words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Tyler zoomed in with his camera, capturing every nuance of her emotional breakdown for what she now realized was probably official documentation. "Genetic predisposition to violence runs in families," he said with clinical detachment, "especially when they've been trained in combat sports from a young age." The observation felt like a trap closing around her. They weren't just investigating her uncle's alleged crimes. They were building a case against her based on inherited criminal tendencies. Kevin took a step closer, his massive frame casting a shadow across her table. "Time to cooperate, little girl. Tell us what Roberto told you about his business arrangements." The diminutive address triggered something primal in Maya's nervous system. Her uncle's voice echoed in her memory. "Never let anyone make you feel small, mija. Size isn't about height, it's about heart." "He never told me anything about business," she said, her voice gaining strength, "because there wasn't any business to discuss." Derek laughed, but the sound carried no humor. "Right. That's why he left you that duffel bag full of cash in his bedroom closet." The words hit her like a lightning strike. She had found that bag 3 weeks after the funeral, hidden behind winter coats that still smelled like his cologne. $6,000 in 20s and 50s, bundled with rubber bands and accompanied by a note that simply read, for college love, Uncle Roberto. Her aunt had assumed it represented savings from his training sessions at the gym. Maya had never questioned the explanation because she hadn't wanted to discover anything that might tarnish her memories of the man who had raised her. Now those memories felt contaminated by suspicion and doubt. That money was from his coaching, she said, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. $6,000 in small bills? Tyler's camera captured her every reaction. From training sessions that paid minimum wage? Come on, Maya, even you can't be that naive. The mockery in his voice struck the same nerve that high school bullies had been targeting for years. But this time, instead of retreat and avoidance, she felt something different building in her chest. Something that felt like her uncle's hands guiding her through boxing combinations in their garage gym. Maybe I am naive, she said quietly. Maybe I believed in someone who turned out to be different than I thought. But that doesn't make me stupid. Derek sensed the shift in her demeanor and moved closer, his badge still visible in his open wallet. Smart girls cooperate with police investigations, especially when they're trying to help their families avoid serious legal trouble. The threat was clear. Cooperate or face charges as an accessory after the fact. Maya felt the trap tightening around her with mechanical precision. Each word calculated to break down her resistance and force compliance. But something else was happening too. The controlled breathing techniques Roberto had taught her were kicking in automatically, slowing her heart rate and sharpening her focus. The chaos of emotion that had dominated her thoughts for the past hour began to crystallize into something more dangerous. "What exactly do you want from me?" she asked. Carmen stepped forward again, her face pale but determined. "Don't say anything without a lawyer present. These boys aren't here officially. They're fishing for information they can't get through legal channels." Derek spun toward Carmen with fury that revealed how close to the truth her observation had landed. "Stay out of this, lady. This doesn't concern you." "This is my restaurant," Carmen replied, her voice gaining strength. "Everything that happens here concerns me." Tyler swung his camera toward Carmen, capturing her defiant stance with the same clinical precision he had used on Maya. "Carmen Rodriguez, former accounting specialist for Riverside Business Associates." Interesting how all these connections keep appearing. The color drained from Carmen's face, as if someone had opened a valve. Maya watched the older woman's confident posture crumble into something approaching terror. "That was a long time ago," Carmen whispered. "I don't have anything to do with that anymore." "Maybe not," Derek said with satisfaction. "But tax records show some pretty interesting financial patterns in this restaurant's books, almost like someone's been washing money through pizza sales." The accusation hit Carmen like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the nearest table for support, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Maya felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Roberto's mysterious income, Carmen's nervousness, the calculated way Derek and his companions had cornered them both in the restaurant. This wasn't random harassment. This was a coordinated investigation targeting multiple people in what appeared to be an organized criminal network. "You think my uncle and Mrs. Rodriguez were partners in some kind of money laundering operation," she said, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. "Think?" Tyler laughed as he adjusted his camera angle. "We know. The only question is how much you know about their business arrangements." The weight of accusations settled over her like a heavy blanket. Everything she had believed about her family, her community, her own identity, was being systematically dismantled by three teenagers with professional surveillance equipment and inside knowledge of police investigations. But beneath the shock and confusion, something else was stirring. Something that felt like Roberto's calloused hands steadying her stance before throwing combinations at the heavy bag in their garage. "I don't know anything about money laundering," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But I'm starting to understand what you really want." Derek leaned closer, his breath smelling like spearmint gum and predatory satisfaction. "Enlighten us." Maya met his gaze directly for the first time since this confrontation began. "You want me to confess to crimes I didn't commit, so you can close cases your father can't solve legally." The observation landed like a punch to the solar plexus. Derek's confident expression flickered momentarily, revealing something that looked uncomfortably like recognition. "Careful," he said quietly. "Accusations like that can get people in serious trouble. More trouble than being framed for my uncle's alleged crimes?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge thrown down in the center of a boxing ring. Maya felt her uncle's training taking over, the calm focus that came from years of learning to fight opponents larger and stronger than herself. But this fight would be different than anything Roberto had prepared her for. This fight would determine whether she maintained any connection to the life she had built, or whether everything she thought she knew would be consumed by the flames of a conspiracy she was only beginning to understand. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Kevin shifted his weight, massive shoulders blocking the exit route completely, while Tyler's camera continued its relentless documentation. Derek's eyes held the cold calculation of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted through intimidation and leverage. But something had changed in Maya's stance. Her feet had moved slightly apart, weight distributed evenly in a way that would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't spent years learning to read combat positioning. "Last chance," Derek said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. "Tell us what Roberto told you about his storage locations, or this gets a lot more complicated." Before Maya could respond, Kevin moved with surprising speed for someone his size, his massive hand clamped around her left wrist with enough pressure to cut off circulation, pinning her arm against the table while Tyler adjusted his camera angle to capture every detail of the interaction. "Stop playing dumb, little girl," Kevin growled, his grip tightening until she could feel bones grinding together. "We know he told you something before he died." Old men always leave instructions for their favorite nieces. Pain shot up Maya's arm, but instead of the expected cry of distress, she found herself calculating angles and leverage points with the cold precision Roberto had drilled into her during thousands of training sessions. The garage gym echoed in her memory. "Never panic when someone grabs you, Mija. Panic makes you stupid, and stupid gets you hurt." "I already told you," she said through gritted teeth. "He never said anything about hidden money." Derek leaned closer, his badge still visible in his open wallet, like a threat and a promise. "Maybe Kevin needs to help improve your memory." The casual suggestion of increased violence triggered something primal in Maya's nervous system. This wasn't high school bullying anymore. This was assault, with the implicit protection of police authority behind it. But they had made a critical miscalculation. "Hit us if you dare," Derek taunted, his voice rising with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. "Just like your psycho uncle used to do when people asked too many questions." The words psycho uncle detonated in Maya's mind like an incendiary device. Every memory of Roberto's gentle hands teaching her to read, his patient voice explaining homework problems, his proud smile when she mastered a new boxing combination, all of it crystallized into focused fury that demanded physical expression. Her right hand moved with muscle memory perfected through years of repetition. The uppercut traveled less than 18 inches, but it carried every ounce of grief, rage, and protective love she felt for the man these people were trying to destroy. The impact connected with Derek's jaw at the precise angle Roberto had taught her to maximize force transfer. His head snapped backward with a crack that echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot, and his body followed, crashing into the booth seat with enough violence to crack the vinyl upholstery. But even as satisfaction flooded through her system, a horrifying realization began to dawn. The punch had been too clean, too professional, too perfect. Tyler's camera had captured every microsecond of the combination, the footwork, the hip rotation, the follow-through that spoke of extensive training rather than lucky desperation. This wasn't a scared teenager throwing a wild haymaker in self-defense. This was a trained fighter executing technique with precision that would have made her uncle proud, and that distinction might destroy any chance she had of surviving what came next. Perfect, Tyler breathed, reviewing the footage on his device screen. Absolutely perfect. Dad's going to love this. Kevin released her wrist and stepped back, his expression mixing surprise with something that looked disturbingly like professional admiration. "Damn, girl! Where'd you learn to hit like that?" The question hung in the air, like an accusation. Maya stared at her own fist, still tingling from the impact, and realized she had just provided them with exactly the evidence they needed to support their genetic violent tendency theory. Derek groaned from the booth, blood trickling from his split lip as he struggled to focus his eyes. When he finally managed to look at her, his expression held vindication rather than anger. "Got what we needed," he slurred through swelling that was already distorting his speech. "That punch proves everything." Before Maya could process the full implications of what had just occurred, the basement door burst open with enough force to rattle the drink cooler. Carmen Martinez emerged like an avenging angel, wielding a pump-action shotgun with the practiced grip of someone who had handled weapons before. "Get out!" she shouted, the barrel trained on Kevin's center mass. "All of you!" Right now, the transformation from nervous restaurant owner to armed defender happened so quickly that even Tyler's professional reflexes struggled to adjust his camera angle. Carmen's stance suggested military or law enforcement training, feet positioned for stability, shoulders squared, finger properly positioned along the trigger guard. "Whoa, lady," Kevin said, raising his massive hands in mock surrender. "No need for dramatics. We're just having a conversation." "Conversation's over," Carmen replied, her voice steady despite the obvious adrenaline coursing through her system. "You got what you came for." Time to leave. Derek struggled to his feet, using the booth for support, while blood continued to drip from his damaged mouth. His eyes held a satisfaction that chilled Maya more than any threat could have. "We'll be in touch," he said, though the swelling made his words difficult to understand. This was very educational. Tyler continued filming as they gathered their equipment, documenting Carmen's defensive posture and the shotgun with the same clinical precision he had used throughout the evening. Every angle seemed calculated to support whatever narrative they were constructing. As the trio moved toward the exit, Derek paused near the door and turned back with a smile made grotesque by his split lip. "Thanks for the demonstration, Maya. Dad's going to be very interested in your inherited skills." The door chimed as they departed, but the sound felt more like a funeral bell than the cheerful signal of customers leaving. Carmen maintained her defensive position until their voices faded into the parking lot, then slowly lowered the weapon with hands that trembled slightly. "We need to talk," she said without looking at Maya. "Right now." The basement of Angelo's Pizzeria looked nothing like what Maya had expected. Instead of storage shelves filled with restaurant supplies, she found herself in what appeared to be a makeshift command center. File cabinets lined one wall, their locks showing signs of frequent use. A desk in the corner supported multiple phones and what looked like a police scanner crackling with periodic radio chatter. But what dominated the space was a bulletin board covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and documents connected by colored string, like something from a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. At the center of it all was a photograph of her uncle. "Roberto knew this day would come," Carmen said, setting the shotgun in a gun safe that looked far more sophisticated than anything a restaurant owner should need. "He spent the last year of his life preparing for it." Maya stared at the bulletin board, her mind struggling to process the implications of what she was seeing. Roberto's photograph was connected to images of other people. Some she recognized from the neighborhood, others who looked like police officers or government officials. "What is this place?" she whispered. "Insurance," Carmen replied, pulling a manila folder from one of the filing cabinets. "Your uncle wasn't the criminal they're trying to make him out to be. He was the opposite." She opened the folder to reveal financial documents, bank statements, and what appeared to be surveillance photographs taken from hidden cameras. The evidence painted a picture that turned everything Derek had told her completely upside down. Roberto worked as muscle for the syndicate, yes, Carmen continued, her voice gaining strength as she explained. But he was documenting everything. Names, dates, financial transactions, corruption networks. He was building a case to bring them all down. The revelation hit Maya like cold water. He was working undercover? Not officially. The police department was too compromised. Detective Hoffman, Derek's father, is one of their key assets. Roberto knew he couldn't trust anyone in uniform. Carmen pulled out a thick ledger book that looked like it belonged in an accountant's office rather than a pizza restaurant basement. The pages contained detailed records of money transfers, names, and coded references that suggested a sophisticated criminal operation. "This restaurant was never about money laundering," Carmen explained. "It was a front, but not the way they think." Roberto used it as a base of operations to track syndicate activities. "I helped him document everything because my accounting background made me useful for following financial trails." As if summoned by her words, the sound of vehicles pulling into the parking lot echoed through the basement ceiling. Multiple engines, doors slamming, radio chatter that was too clear to be coming from Carmen's scanner. "They're here," Carmen said with grim satisfaction. "Right on schedule." Maya felt panic rising in her throat. "The police." "Some of them are real cops," Carmen replied, moving to another filing cabinet and withdrawing what appeared to be recording equipment. "Others are syndicate enforcers with badges. The problem is telling the difference." Heavy footsteps crossed the restaurant floor above them, accompanied by voices shouting orders and demands for access to the basement. Carmen moved with practiced efficiency, gathering specific documents and stuffing them into a waterproof bag. "What Roberto discovered," she continued while working, "is that the syndicate didn't just infiltrate the police department. They own significant portions of it. Detective Hoffman has been covering up their operations for years while building false cases against people who threaten their interests." The basement door rattled as someone tested the lock from above. Carmen's movements became more urgent as she sealed the document bag and handed it to Maya. "Your uncle died because he was about to expose everything," she said. "The car accident wasn't an accident, and now they're trying to discredit his memory by framing his family for the crimes he was fighting against." Before Maya could respond, the door burst open and armed figures in tactical gear poured down the stairs. Some wore police uniforms, others dressed in civilian clothes, but all carried weapons and moved with military precision. Detective James Hoffman followed them down, his resemblance to Derek unmistakable despite 20 additional years and the hard lines of someone accustomed to violence. His eyes swept the basement command center with satisfaction rather than surprise. "Carmen Rodriguez," he said formally, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering and obstruction of justice." "What about possession of evidence in a criminal investigation?" Carmen replied calmly, her hands raised but her voice steady. "Or does that only apply when it's convenient for your narrative?" Hoffman's expression darkened as he noticed the document bag in Maya's hands. "What's in the bag, sweetheart?" The endearment carried the same false warmth his son had used earlier, and it triggered the same controlled fury that had driven her punch upstairs. But this time, She forced herself to think rather than react. "Just personal papers," she said, though her voice carried a tremor she couldn't entirely suppress. "I'll be the judge of that." Hoffman moved closer, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "Hand it over." The moment stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Maya found herself caught between impossible choices: surrender the evidence that might clear her uncle's name, or resist and face charges that could destroy what remained of her life. That's when Carmen made the choice for her. "The bag contains copies," she announced with the calm precision of someone playing a final card. "The originals were uploaded to secure servers an hour ago, along with instructions to release everything if either of us disappears or gets arrested on false charges." Hoffman's confident expression flickered momentarily before reasserting itself. "Bluffing won't help you here. Check your phones," Carmen suggested mildly. As if choreographed, several of the armed figures began receiving notifications simultaneously. The sounds of incoming messages, calls, and alerts created a digital symphony that filled the basement with electronic chaos. Hoffman's own phone buzzed insistently. When he checked the screen, his face went through a spectrum of emotions, ending in something that looked like barely controlled rage. "You uploaded classified police files to the internet," he said through gritted teeth. "I uploaded evidence of criminal conspiracy involving public officials," Carmen corrected. "There's a difference, though I understand how you might confuse the two." The detective's hand moved closer to his weapon, but before he could draw it, one of the uniformed officers stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Sir," the officer said quietly, "we're getting calls from Internal Affairs, the FBI, and 3 different news organizations. They're asking about financial irregularities and evidence tampering in cases dating back 5 years." The implications of Carmen's dead man's switch began cascading through the basement like falling dominoes. Maya watched Hoffman's carefully constructed authority crumble as the reality of exposure settled over him. But victory felt hollow when she realized the personal cost of this revelation. 3 weeks later, Maya sat in the guidance counselor's office at Lincoln High School, staring at a disciplinary letter that would follow her for the rest of her academic career. The official reason for her suspension was assault on a fellow student, though everyone involved knew the real story was far more complicated. Derek Hoffman had withdrawn from school entirely, his family relocating to another state while his father faced federal investigation for corruption charges. Tyler and Kevin had been charged as accomplices in an illegal surveillance operation targeting civilians, but the victory felt Pyrrhic when balanced against the wreckage left behind. Angelo's Pizzeria had closed permanently after the federal raid, leaving Carmen unemployed and facing her own legal challenges, despite her cooperation with investigators. The neighborhood had lost not just a restaurant, but a gathering place that had anchored the community for over a decade. Maya's aunt had suffered a minor heart attack from the stress of learning about Roberto's secret activities, though doctors expected a full recovery. The medical bills would consume most of the mysterious $6,000 Roberto had left behind. And despite Carmen's evidence clearing Roberto's name posthumously, the damage to his reputation lingered in whispered conversations and sideways glances from neighbors who couldn't separate truth from the conspiracy theories that had dominated local news coverage. Walking home from school that Friday afternoon, Maya felt the weight of everything that had changed settling over her like a heavy coat. The boxing gym where she and Roberto had spent countless hours training together sat empty and dark, its lease expired and no new tenant in sight. She was passing the mailbox when she noticed the package. No return address, no delivery service markings, just her name written in careful block letters that made her blood run cold. Inside her bedroom, she unwrapped the package with careful precision, half expecting another piece of evidence about her uncle's mysterious past. Instead, she found a USB drive wrapped in tissue paper, accompanied by a handwritten note that made her hands tremble. "Your uncle hid the real evidence. They're coming for you next. Trust no one in uniform. The fight isn't over. It's just beginning. A friend who knew Roberto Santos. The files that loaded painted a picture that dwarfed everything Carmen had revealed in the restaurant basement. Financial records showing systematic corruption reaching into federal agencies. Photographs of meetings between police officials and known criminals. Video footage of evidence being planted and destroyed. Communication logs proving that the syndicate's influence extended far beyond local law enforcement. But most chilling of all was a document labeled Active Threats that contained her own name, alongside a detailed assessment of her potential for future resistance activities. They had been watching her long before the confrontation at Angelo's Pizzeria. They knew about her boxing training, her academic performance, her family loyalties. They had profiles on her friends, her teachers, even her aunt's medical history. The scope of surveillance felt overwhelming, but beneath the fear was something else. Something that reminded her of the controlled fury that had driven her punch 3 weeks earlier. She closed the laptop and moved to her window, intending to process this information in the privacy of her own thoughts. That's when she saw the black sedan parked across the street. Detective James Hoffman sat behind the wheel, his eyes fixed on her house with the patient focus of a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near her according to the restraining order Carmen's lawyer had obtained, but rules seemed to matter less when the entire system was compromised. As she watched, he lifted a phone to his ear and began speaking, his gaze never leaving her bedroom window. The conversation lasted less than a minute, but when he hung up, his expression carried the satisfaction of someone who had just received permission to proceed with unpleasant but necessary work. Maya stepped back from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs, as the full implications of her situation crystallized. The confrontation at Angelo's Pizzeria hadn't ended anything. It had just been the opening round of a much longer fight. The evidence on the USB drive proved the syndicate's influence reached into agencies that were supposed to provide oversight and protection. Carmen's revelations had damaged their local operations, but the larger organization remained intact and focused on eliminating anyone who could threaten their continued existence, which meant that despite everything she had endured, everything she had lost, the real battle was just beginning. Her uncle's voice echoed in her memory, carrying wisdom that felt more relevant now than ever before. Sometimes the hardest fights are the ones you never wanted, Mija, but that doesn't mean you get to walk away from them. Through her bedroom window, Detective Hoffman's sedan pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the evening traffic. But Maya knew he would be back, they all would be back, and next time, she intended to be ready.